As you know, there is a growing disrespect for government and for churches and for schools, the news media, and other institutions. This is not a message of happiness or reassurance, but it is the truth, and it is a warning. These changes did not happen overnight. They've come upon us gradually over the last generation. Years that were filled with shocks and tragedy.
In 1941, during World War II, whilst France was under German occupation, French-Algerian author, philosopher, and journalist Albert Camus began work on his great novel, The Plague, eventually published in 1947.
He's like an existentialist philosopher. Existentialists believe that you have to live like life is absurd, life is suffering, and there's no meaning to it all. You just have to live the moment and take each moment as it comes and live it to the fullest, kind of idea.
In The Plague, the Algerian coastal town of Oran notices a surge in rats seemingly coming out of nowhere and dying in the streets. At the same time, fever spreads across the population, and the story's lead character, Dr. Rieu, finds himself up against what he deduces to be an outbreak of bubonic plague. People are dying fast, hospitals quickly fill up, and medical aid can't come soon enough. Whilst academics were quick to interpret the novel as a parable for the Nazi invasion of France,
as a kind of allegory of World War II, a way to talk about the virus that first infects the rats, and then infects the weaker humans, and then affects everybody.
a broader understanding of Camus' body of work puts the plague in the context of a portrait of our own human frailty, and the frailty and fragility of society and civilization as a whole. To put the story together, Camus looked back into history. In the first part of the book, referencing the Plague of Athens, Marseille, Jaffa, and the Black Death, moments in time Dr. Rieu thinks of as he ponders what might happen next to his own town today in the 1940s. All this gives weight to the idea that to forget or to ignore history, we are condemned to repeat it. But to add a layer of complexity to Camus' ideas, let's also consider Kurt Vonnegut's response to that perspective, which is that no matter what, we are doomed to repeat history, because it makes up part of the fabric of who we are. And so we come to Contagion, the story of director Steven Soderbergh traveling from 2020 back in time to 2011 to release a movie about what a pandemic in 2020 will look like.
That's all in the past. You mean the future? Whatever!
Camus was digging through the past to tell a modern-day story for his time. Soderbergh was looking into the future for our time. While the world deals with the current outbreak of COVID, Contagion is back in the charts, nearly 10 years since its original release. So the question is, what's going on? When the film was recently broadcast on television, a few weeks into the pandemic, there was some outcry on social media, people questioning the tact of the decision, saying that it should not have been shown at this time. I'm not one for should and shouldn't when it comes to film and art in general. If you don't want to be exposed to something, that's one thing. But society and civilization don't flourish when discourse is shut down. Barry Jenkins, director of the brilliant Moonlight and If Beale Street Could Talk, recently explains to the New York Times why he paid $12.99 to watch Contagion again, now, after all these years. I was really curious to see how well it would line up to what is happening right now. It was shocking. It felt like I was watching a documentary. It scared me. The fact that it's a revived hit at this point in time is worth paying attention to. It's evidence that we don't just turn to films for entertainment and distraction. We do so in a pursuit of understanding and insight. When it comes to Contagion, wow, things get pretty uncanny. Steven Soderbergh is one of our most interesting, entertaining, and intelligent filmmakers today. If the name isn't familiar to you, he is at the helm of films you definitely have heard of. The Ocean's 11 trilogy, Out of Sight, Erin Brokovich, and the excellent Traffic, whose cinematography really stands out as Soderbergh's signature style. One of my personal favorites of Soderbergh's is the recent Solaris, and there is of course Magic Mike. If you like any of those films and want to see something that might have gone under your radar, I recommend The Girlfriend Experience, about a New York escort/girlfriend for hire, the action-packed and incredibly cast Haywire, and the low-budget thriller Unsane. Now, here's the thing. When a movie like Day After Tomorrow comes out, it's understandable that the conversation around climate change and rising sea levels suddenly peaks. Or when movies about asteroids hitting the Earth present us with a no-win scenario, scientists on television warn us that it's not a matter of if, but when.
The solar system is a shooting gallery.
But somehow when it comes to disease and epidemics, those conversations have not been as prominent in our day-to-day vernacular. Contagion wasn't made as a science fiction dystopian disaster movie.
The challenge is to avoid the cliches that typically fill this kind of, scary, modern horror film.
Horror, perhaps, but it always has been a portrait of how things could pan out and would pan out in the context of our society today if there were ever to be a viral outbreak.
While we were watching the fallout from H1N1, which was happening while we were developing the script.
Just for a second, tell us what H1N1 is and was.
The H1N1 was an influenza virus.
That scared the hell out of us.
That scared the hell out of everybody, and people in public health have been criticized for overreacting to it. Now, I don't agree with that, but I don't want to interrupt the story.
This was happening when you were involved in making this movie.
Right.
Hence the eeriness, now, of some of the film's imagery and verbal landscape.
Right now, our best defense has been social distancing. No handshaking, staying home when you're sick, washing your hands frequently.
And stop touching your face, Dave.
It was always intended as an accurate portrait, understood if one were to take a moment to check the end credits, where a dozen specialists are named: doctors, virologists, epidemiologists, lab technicians, and science journalists, imparting their knowledge, handing it to us on a silver platter.
And having enough science to make you feel like it was real, but not so much that you just sort of fade away.
It doesn't sound like a textbook.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The film opens with a montage following people, their hands, and the objects they come into contact with, the camera cleverly keeping track of these movements. It keeps this visual motif going throughout the film. This is the invisible enemy. Traced not just from person to person, but from one end of the world to the other. Things quickly escalate after Gwyneth Paltrow's character loses control of her body. Her eyes disengage as she becomes a shell of her former self.
Just go up to your room, honey. Okay, let's get some help. Beth.
Sir, you have to go.
When the doctor breaks the news to her husband, his first response is,
Lisa, can I go talk to her?
Mr. Amoff, I'm sorry. Your wife is dead.
This is more common than we allow ourselves to admit. The power of denial, the lack of grounding in the reality of what's happening right in front of us. In 2011, it was hard to believe that anyone would be denied a regular traditional family funeral for their loved ones, regardless of circumstance, for the natural cycle of grief to begin. Yet, here we are. You can't visit or stand by the side of your loved one's bed as they fade away. Mass graves are appearing, and the imagery in the film really does resemble what we are seeing today. Soderbergh's style for this kind of storytelling is perfect. In dealing with a sensitive topic, he remains truthful and sincere. He uses muted, humanistic tones, not exaggerating drama for drama's sake.
I want it to be intimate. I want it to be personal.
Look at this pivotal moment in the narrative, when the stakes are about to rise.
You want me to, take a sample? Or?
I want you to move away from the table.
There are many ways in which this could have been portrayed.
Should I call someone?
Call everyone.
Every director choosing a different style.
Sample? Or?
I want you to move away from the table.
And it could have gone.
Should I call someone?
Everyone!
As governments realize they need to get involved and take action as the virus spreads, only a few days into the pandemic, one of their first questions to a committee of specialists is
any antivirus, anything.
Revealing world leaders' lack of knowledge, preparedness, and resources, but worst of all, their naivety.
Actually, leadership worldwide isn't in a terribly good state either.
Again, to use a World War II analogy, it has often been said about how extraordinarily lucky the world was in those years to have Roosevelt and Churchill, two first-class leaders that happened to be in charge of the two most important countries in that battle. We have not been as fortunate this time around.
The threat is nearly invisible in ordinary ways. It is a crisis of confidence. We can see this crisis in the growing doubt about the meaning of our own lives and in the loss of a unity of purpose.
In its attempts to reflect the reality of an outbreak, Contagion also shows how bad things could have been.
You do think, yes, well, that whole thing about Hong Kong, the disease spreading out, everyone catching it, is the kind of thing that Five Live will be reporting on at some stage in the not too distant future.
But yes. There is some accuracy in its predictions, but crucial day-to-day aspects have not materialized. Shops are not being looted and set on fire. There is no run for cash and oil. Crucial services such as bin collection have not ceased, and the number of deaths in the time frame presented is inflated. It's important to note and to remember that in our real-life case, human decency, charity, empathy, and reason have ultimately triumphed. What can be frustrating is looking at this movie, thinking, we knew this, we had the knowledge and foresight to see it coming. Though these stories have been told before, they are not about the unfolding drama of rising sea levels, of asteroids, or a virus. They are about the human condition, about our own individual search for strength. The lead character in The Plague, even with his knowledge of history, is himself uncertain as to what to do. The author takes a moment to step back and reflect on this, to justify to us the character's surprise. Pestilence is in fact very common, but we find it hard to believe in a pestilence when it descends upon us. There have been as many plagues in the world as there have been wars. Yet plagues and wars always find people unprepared. The people of our town were no more guilty than anyone else. They merely forgot to be modest and thought that everything was still possible for them, which implied that pestilence was impossible. They continued with business, with making arrangements for travel and holding opinions. Why should they have thought about the plague, which negates the future, negates journeys, and debate?
The way you excuse yourself, and the way it certainly shows up in the book, I think it's pretty clear from what happened in Germany at the time, is that you hide in these social structures that are created, and you say, well, you know, I have to get to work. Well, I have to pay for these things. And so in the same way that there is this denial about the plague, when it's pretty plain something horrible is happening, you can find people hiding and taking comfort in the old habits. And only a few individuals then can stand out and stand over and against.
They considered themselves free. At this stage of the pandemic, many of us are asking if and when things might go back to normal, whatever that means to us. Perhaps it's also worthwhile asking ourselves, what else could we prepare for? What can we prioritize before it's too late to choose and the choice is made for us? What other changes need we make? What moral decisions, what actions in our day-to-day lives do we embrace now, if not for our own sake, then for the preservation of civilization and for the sake of our children's well-being? Thank you for watching The Third Image. If you like what you see, please hit the like button, and for more videos, please subscribe and check the Instagram feed for regular updates, reviews, and recommendations.